What if the thing that makes you feel different from everyone else is not something wrong with you? What if the way you think, feel, notice, and process the world is simply deeper and more complex than the people around you know how to understand? Maybe you have spent years hearing that you are too sensitive, too analytical, too emotional, too quiet, too intense, too observant, too complicated. Maybe you notice things other people ignore. You sense tension before anyone speaks. You can spend hours thinking about one conversation. You question things other people simply accept. You need solitude after being around people. You feel deeply, sometimes more deeply than you wish you did. And perhaps you have wondered, why can't I just be normal? But what if normal was never the goal? What if the real challenge is learning how to live with a mind that notices more, feels more, and questions more? Today, I want to explore 6 signs that may suggest you have a highly perceptive and unusually reflective mind. Not a diagnosis, not proof that you are better than other people, and certainly not a reason to romanticize suffering. But there are people whose minds become highly observant because of temperament, experience, sensitivity, curiosity, or adaptation. Sometimes difficult environments teach a person to pay extraordinary attention. Sometimes deep thinking is part of personality. Sometimes sensitivity is simply sensitivity. And sometimes these qualities become both a gift and a burden. Because the same mind that sees what others miss can also struggle to turn itself off. The first sign is that you notice what other people don't say. You don't simply listen to words. You listen to tone, pauses, facial expressions, changes in behavior, contradictions. You notice when someone says, "I'm fine," but doesn't sound fine. You notice when a friend becomes quieter. You notice when someone's enthusiasm feels forced. You notice when 2 people are pretending everything is normal even though something between them has changed. You may even sense tension before there is an obvious reason for it. And sometimes people will ask you, "How did you know?" You may not have a simple answer. You simply noticed. This kind of perception can be strengthened by many things. Some people are naturally observant. Some are highly sensitive to social cues. Some have spent years learning to monitor emotional environments. If you grew up needing to understand people's moods quickly, your attention may have become especially tuned to subtle changes. You learn to notice, is this person angry? Are they disappointed? Is it safe to speak? Should I stay quiet? Should I help? Should I leave? The problem is that a skill developed for safety can continue operating even when the original environment has changed. Now, instead of simply being perceptive, you may become hyper-aware. A delayed message feels meaningful. A change in tone feels threatening. A quiet room feels suspicious. You may constantly scan for signs that something is wrong. So there is an important distinction. Perception says, "I notice this." Hypervigilance says, "I must figure out what this means immediately." The first can be a strength. The second can be exhausting. A rare mind does not need to notice less. It may need to learn that not everything it notices requires action. You can notice someone is upset without becoming responsible for fixing them. You can sense tension without assuming you caused it. You can observe without absorbing. That is when sensitivity becomes wisdom. The second sign is that you think deeply about things that other people move past quickly. A conversation can end for everyone else. For you, it continues. You replay the words. You think about what you said, what they said, what they might have meant, what you could have said differently. You don't simply experience events. You analyze them. And sometimes this makes ordinary interactions feel much larger inside your mind. You may ask questions like, why did they react that way? What does that say about the relationship? Why did I feel so strongly? What was really happening beneath the surface? Your mind naturally looks for patterns and meaning. This can make you thoughtful, reflective, and insightful. But it can also turn into rumination. And this is where the distinction matters. Reflection asks, what can I learn from this? Rumination asks, what if I think about this 100 more times and finally feel certain? Reflection has an endpoint. Rumination keeps reopening the same door. So one of the most useful things you can learn is that depth does not require endless analysis. Sometimes the deepest answer is I don't know. You do not need to explain every human behavior. You do not need to find the hidden meaning behind every silence. You do not need to solve every emotional mystery. A sophisticated mind learns not only how to investigate, but also when to stop investigating. Tell yourself, I have thought about this enough for today. I can return to the present. This question may not have an answer yet. That isn't intellectual weakness, it is mental discipline. The third sign is that you are uncomfortable with shallow relationships. You may be surrounded by people and still feel lonely. Not because nobody is physically present, because you want depth, you want conversations that go somewhere, you want honesty, you want curiosity, you want people who are willing to talk about what they actually feel. Small talk may exhaust you. Performative relationships may leave you empty. You may find yourself asking, what do we actually have in common beyond routine? What happens when the conversation gets honest? Can I be vulnerable here? You may not need hundreds of friends. You may want a few relationships where you can be completely yourself. This can sometimes make you feel unusual. In a culture that often rewards visibility and constant social activity, you may wonder whether something is wrong with you because you don't enjoy being everywhere. But needing depth isn't the same thing as being antisocial. Some people simply connect through quality rather than quantity. However, be careful not to turn this preference into superiority. A common mistake is to think, I am deeper than everyone else. That can become another form of isolation. The healthier interpretation is, I connect deeply with certain people, and I don't need every relationship to satisfy every emotional need. Different people offer different things. Some relationships are for laughter, some are for support, some are for shared interests, some are for profound conversations. A rare mind does not need to reject ordinary connection. It simply learns which relationships can hold depth. The fourth sign is that you question the life everyone else seems to accept. You don't automatically follow the script. You may ask, why should success look like this? Why am I supposed to want this career? Why should marriage happen by a certain age? Why do people spend their lives chasing things that make them miserable? Why is being busy treated like being valuable? You may have noticed that many people live according to inherited expectations. Do what is respectable, get a good job, make money, be productive, settle down, buy things, look successful, repeat, and you may find yourself asking, is this actually my life? That question can be uncomfortable because once you start questioning the script, you cannot always go back to blindly following it. Your mind may begin looking underneath social expectations for meaning. What do I actually value? What kind of life would feel meaningful if nobody could see it? What would I choose if I didn't need approval? These are powerful questions, but they come with a responsibility. Questioning everything is not wisdom by itself. Skepticism can become another form of rigidity. A genuinely thoughtful person remains open to evidence, capable of changing their mind and willing to admit when they don't know. The goal isn't to reject everything. The goal is to choose consciously. The fifth sign is that you experience a tension between your inner world and your outer behavior. Inside, you may feel deeply. Outside, you may appear calm. Inside, you may be questioning everything. Outside, you may simply say, I'm fine. Inside, you may be exhausted. Outside, you continue performing. This gap can become enormous. You can become so good at functioning that nobody realizes how much energy it takes. People may tell you, you handle everything so well. They don't see the internal effort, the mental calculations, the self-monitoring, the emotional processing, the constant attempt to understand yourself and everyone else. This can happen especially when you learn that vulnerability was inconvenient. You may have discovered early that being competent received more approval than being honest about your needs. So you became competent, reliable, strong. But eventually, the question becomes, who takes care of the person who takes care of everyone? Your mind may be incredibly developed in some ways while your emotional needs remain neglected. And this is where an important principle comes in. Understanding yourself is not the same as caring for yourself. You can understand exactly why you are exhausted and still keep overworking. You can know why you people please and still keep saying yes. You can understand your childhood patterns and still ignore your present boundaries. Insight is valuable, but insight has to become behavior. At some point you must ask, what will I actually do differently? Maybe you rest, maybe you say no, maybe you ask for help, maybe you stop explaining yourself, maybe you leave an environment that repeatedly drains you. A rare mind becomes more powerful when insight turns into action. The sixth sign is that you often feel like an outsider even when you belong. This is perhaps the most emotionally painful sign. You can be surrounded by people and still feel fundamentally different. You may feel like you process life differently. You notice subtleties others don't notice. You care about questions others don't seem interested in. You may feel older emotionally than people your age. Or perhaps you feel strangely disconnected from the dominant culture around you. This can create a powerful temptation. I don't belong anywhere. But be careful. Feeling different does not necessarily mean you are destined to remain alone. Sometimes it means you haven't yet found environments where your qualities are understood. A person can look strange in the wrong environment and perfectly normal in the right one. Think about a plant. A desert plant looks unusual in a rainforest. A rainforest plant looks strange in a desert. The problem may not be the plant. The environment may simply not match its needs. The same can be true psychologically. Maybe you don't need to become less sensitive. Maybe you need relationships where sensitivity is respected. Maybe you don't need to become less thoughtful. Maybe you need people who enjoy depth. Maybe you don't need to force yourself into constant stimulation. Maybe you need environments where quiet is acceptable. This is why self-understanding matters. You need to know what kind of environment allows you to function without constantly shrinking yourself. And if this message resonates with you, comment 777 below. Not because the number itself has magical power. Let it be symbolic. Let 777 mean, I am learning to understand the way my mind works. I will stop treating my sensitivity as a defect. I will use my awareness without letting it control me. I will become more connected to myself. Because the goal isn't to become more unusual. The goal is to become more integrated. There is something else you need to understand. A rare or highly perceptive mind can become both a gift and a burden depending on the relationship you develop with it. Your ability to notice subtle cues can help you understand people. But if you constantly scan for danger, you can become exhausted. Your ability to think deeply can help you solve problems. But if you cannot stop analyzing, you can become trapped in rumination. Your desire for meaningful relationships can create deep connection. But if you expect every relationship to be profound, ordinary human connection may disappoint you. Your tendency to question social norms can lead to originality. But if you reject everything automatically, you may mistake opposition for wisdom. Your emotional awareness can create empathy. But if you absorb everyone else's pain, you may lose yourself. Your introspection can create self-understanding. But if you constantly turn inward, you may become disconnected from action. The goal is balance. A strong mind is not one that does everything intensely. It is one that knows when intensity is useful and when it is time to step back. Sometimes you need to analyze, sometimes you need to act, sometimes you need to talk, sometimes you need to be alone, sometimes you need to understand, sometimes you need to let go. And perhaps one of the most important skills for a perceptive person is learning not to turn every internal experience into a problem that needs solving. You are allowed to have thoughts without analyzing them. You are allowed to feel sadness without turning it into an identity. You are allowed to have an uncomfortable day without searching for a grand spiritual meaning. You are allowed to simply be human. This is especially important if your mind has learned to use analysis as protection. Thinking can create the feeling of control. If I understand it, perhaps I can prevent it. If I predict it, perhaps I can avoid it. If I explain it, perhaps I can make it safe. But life contains uncertainty, and eventually even a very intelligent mind must learn something that intelligence alone cannot provide. Trust. Not blind trust. Not trust that nothing bad will happen. Trust that you can respond when something does, that you can survive uncertainty, that you can ask for help, that you can change direction, that you don't need to know everything in advance. Your mind may want guarantees. Life gives you possibilities. Learning to live between those two realities is a form of maturity. And perhaps there is another reason you feel different. Maybe you learned very early to observe yourself from the outside. You became aware of how you looked, how you sounded, whether people approved, whether you were behaving correctly. This can create a powerful self-awareness. But too much self-monitoring becomes exhausting. You start living as both the person experiencing life and the person constantly evaluating the experience. You are talking to someone while also monitoring how you are being perceived. You are relaxing while wondering whether you are relaxing correctly. You are healing while asking whether you are healed enough. Even spirituality can become another performance. Am I awakened enough? Am I peaceful enough? Why am I still triggered? Why am I still anxious? Why haven't I transcended this? This is where you need to step back. Healing is not a competition. Awareness is not perfection. You don't have to become permanently calm to be healthy. You don't have to eliminate every reaction. You don't have to stop being human. The goal is not to become untouched by life. The goal is to become more flexible in how you respond. Maybe you still get triggered, but you recover faster. Maybe you still overthink, but you notice it sooner. Maybe you still feel deeply, but you no longer interpret sensitivity as weakness. Maybe you still need solitude, but you can also connect when connection matters. That is progress, not perfection. And if you have a mind that feels unusually intense, the answer may not be to quiet it completely. It may be to learn how to work with it. Give it structure. Give it rest. Give it meaningful questions. Give it physical movement. Give it healthy relationships. Give it moments where nothing needs to be analyzed. Because the brain is not designed for constant introspection. Sometimes the healthiest thing a thoughtful person can do is stop thinking and take a walk. Eat, sleep, laugh, listen to music, cook, spend time with someone safe, be in nature, do something ordinary. Not every moment needs to become insight. Sometimes life simply needs to be experienced. And perhaps this is the final lesson. Your mind may be rare in the sense that it processes the world in a way that feels unusually deep, sensitive, or analytical. But your goal is not to prove that you are different. Your goal is to understand yourself well enough that difference doesn't become isolation. You don't need to convince anyone that you are unusually intelligent. You need to learn how to use your strengths without becoming trapped by them. You need to notice when perception becomes hypervigilance, when reflection becomes rumination, when independence becomes isolation, when sensitivity becomes overwhelm, when questioning becomes cynicism, when self-awareness becomes self-obsession. That ability to recognize the difference is real maturity. So tonight ask yourself, what do I notice that other people often miss? When does my awareness help me? When does it exhaust me? What am I constantly analyzing? What am I afraid will happen if I stop analyzing? Where do I feel most like myself? Which relationships allow me to be honest? Where am I shrinking myself to fit? And perhaps the most important question, what does my mind need from me? Maybe it needs rest, maybe structure, maybe expression, maybe connection, maybe boundaries, maybe professional support, maybe simply permission to stop solving everything. You don't have to make your mind smaller. You have to make your life large enough to hold it. And you don't have to become less sensitive. You have to learn how to protect your sensitivity. You don't have to think less. You have to learn what deserves your attention. You don't have to care less. You have to learn where your responsibility ends. You don't have to become ordinary. You have to become comfortable being yourself without needing to prove that you are unusual. Because perhaps the rarest form of intelligence is not knowing more than everyone else. It is knowing yourself deeply enough to understand when your own mind is helping you and when it is hurting you. It is knowing when to question, when to trust, when to speak, when to stay silent, when to act, when to rest, when to let go, when to seek help. And perhaps the most beautiful thing you can discover is that the qualities that made you feel different do not have to remain burdens. Your sensitivity can become empathy, your observation can become discernment, your depth can become wisdom, your questioning can become curiosity, your independence can become resilience, your introspection can become self-knowledge. But only when you stop using these qualities against yourself. So, if you've spent years thinking, why am I like this? Try asking something different. What is this quality trying to teach me? Instead of, why do I feel everything so deeply? Ask, how can I honor my sensitivity without letting it overwhelm me? Instead of, why can't I stop thinking? Ask, what deserves my attention and what can I release? Instead of, why don't I fit in? Ask, where can I belong without pretending? That is a different way of living, a more conscious one. And maybe the goal isn't to become understood by everyone. Maybe the goal is to understand yourself well enough that you no longer need everyone to understand you. You can be different without being defective. You can be sensitive without being weak. You can be thoughtful without being trapped in your thoughts. You can be private without being lonely. You can be independent without refusing support. You can be deep without rejecting the ordinary. And you can have a rare mind while still being a human being who needs rest, connection, laughter, and care. That balance is where wisdom lives. So, if you recognize yourself in these 6 signs, remember this: you are not required to turn your difference into a performance. You don't need to prove that your mind is rare. You don't need to label yourself. You simply need to understand your patterns, protect your energy, and choose environments where you can be fully yourself. And when your mind becomes loud, come back to the present. Feel your feet, notice your breath, look around the room. Let one moment exist without interpreting it. You don't have to understand everything. You don't have to predict everything. You don't have to fix everything. You can simply be here. And perhaps that is the greatest form of intelligence of all, knowing when to use your mind and knowing when to let yourself live. The privilege of a